No note, no warning, no quiet goodbye to the people who needed her most. One ordinary morning, Nancy Guthrie was part of the world, breathing, planning, existing, and then she simply wasn't. The world kept moving. Her family didn't. They stood still in the place where she used to be, waiting for something, anything, that would explain the silence she left behind her for years. They held on. Her picture stayed up on the wall. Her number stayed saved in their phones, even when they knew, really knew, it would never ring back. Every detective who knocked on their door was answered. Every question was faced, no matter how many times it had been asked before. Because what else do you do when someone you love disappears without a trace? You hold on, you wait. You keep the door open. Even when everything inside you starts to wonder if anyone is ever going to walk through it. But hope is a fragile thing, especially when years pass and the silence doesn't break. Then the call came. Not from a neighbor, not from a well-meaning stranger who thought they spotted a familiar face at a rest stop, somewhere to states over. This call came from the FBI, federal agents, the kind of people who don't reach out unless something real has shifted, unless a lead has crossed a threshold and become something that demands a conversation. According to sources close to the investigation, a possible location connected to Nancy Guthrie has surfaced. What that location is, what was found there, what it means for a case that has quietly haunted investigators for years. None of that has been fully disclosed. Not yet. But the FBI doesn't make calls like this to offer comfort. They reach out when something is concrete enough to warrant it. And the people who have been waiting the longest felt that the moment the phone rang. Something has changed. Whatever it is, it changes everything. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't come with a funeral. It doesn't arrive with flowers left on a doorstep, or the soft murmur of people saying the right things in a church somewhere. It doesn't give you a date to circle on the calendar, a marker that says, this is when it ended. This is when you're allowed to start again. Instead, it comes as silence. It comes as open questions that have no walls. It settles into your home and takes up space in a chair that nobody moves, because moving it feels too much like giving up on the person who used to sit there. That is the grief Nancy Guthrie's family has lived inside, and it is heavier than most people will ever understand from the outside looking in. Nancy was, by every account, a woman deeply woven into the fabric of the people around her. Those who knew her don't have to think long before the warmth rises in how they describe her. The way she held on to the small things, the names of your children, the details of a story you told her once in passing, the things that most people forget because they're too busy. She wasn't someone who moved through life quietly unnoticed. She left impressions, real ones, the kind that don't fade just because time keeps moving forward. Which is why her disappearance never made sense, not emotionally, not logically, not in any way that settled cleanly in the minds of the people who loved her. In the days before she vanished, according to people close to her at the time, nothing appeared dramatically wrong. There were tensions, the ordinary kind that most lives carry, but nothing that sent up a signal. Nothing that made anyone lean across a table and ask her directly if she was okay, if she was safe. In hindsight, of course, the ordinary gets re-examined. Every unreturned message becomes a question. Every small moment that passed without weight suddenly carries it in retrospect. That is the cruel alchemy of disappearance. It repaints everything that came before in colors it didn't originally wear. When she didn't appear where she was expected, the first instinct was charitable. A miscommunication, a forgotten arrangement. Maybe she needed a little space. People give each other that grace in the early hours, because the alternative is something nobody wants to reach for. But the hours became a day. The day became several, and the silence on the other end of her phone stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like something far darker than anyone wanted to name. The missing persons report was filed. Investigators arrived with their questions. Her name entered a system built to track the lost, but systems, as the families of missing people learn in the most painful way, are not the same as answers. They are containers. They hold cases open. They do not guarantee that anyone comes home. Years passed. The case didn't close, but it didn't visibly move either. Her family developed the rhythm that families in this situation develop. The check-ins with investigators. The following up on tips that rarely led anywhere. The scanning of faces in public spaces not because they believed it would work, but because the alternative was to stop looking. And stopping felt like surrender. So they kept moving, kept asking, kept showing up, because that was the only thing left that felt like loyalty. And then the FBI called. Before the silence, before the searching, before all of it, there was a life that was fully and genuinely lived. Nancy Guthrie wasn't a headline then. She was a person. That distinction carries more weight than it might seem to, because it is easy, especially in cases that attract public attention, to let someone become defined entirely by their disappearance, to let the mystery of their absence crowd out the reality of who they actually were. And who Nancy actually was matters, not just emotionally, but in the specific, investigative sense of what her disappearance does and doesn't suggest. Those who knew her describe a woman who was genuinely present, not performatively, not the kind of presence that is really just visibility, but the quieter, more substantial kind that leaves a mark long after the moment has passed. She listened. She remembered. She followed up. She showed up in the way that only people who are actually paying attention can show up. She had her routines, the small, unremarkable rituals that anchor a person to their life. A coffee shop returned to, familiar routes, friends checked in with often enough that their absence from her world, when it came, was felt immediately, was noticed immediately. That matters, and not just as a tribute to who she was. It matters because Nancy Guthrie was not someone who had been slowly retreating from her own life. In the weeks or months before she vanished, she had not been withdrawing, not disconnecting. According to the people who knew her best, she was engaged, present, right up until the moment she wasn't. She had plans, real plans, spoken out loud plans for things she was looking forward to, things she expected to be there for. You don't build a future you intend to live and then disappear from it voluntarily. Not without a word, not without something. What no one could answer, not in the first days, not in the months that followed, not across the long stretch of quiet years, was where she went, or why, or whether the truth of it was something anyone was prepared to hold. Most missing persons cases resolve quickly, or they don't resolve at all. They produce answers, often devastating ones, but answers, or they calcify into a kind of permanent, institutional uncertainty. The file stays open. The name stays in the database. Active movement becomes rare. And families, over time, learn to read the silences from investigators not as patience, but as stagnation. Nancy's case fell into that second space. For the people who loved her, each passing year without movement carried its own particular weight. It wasn't the same weight every year. Grief shifts, changes shape, but it never fully lifted. Tips came in over time, as they tend to in cases that maintain any public visibility. Some were genuine, some were not. Investigators followed what they could, eliminated what they could, and were left, each time, with more questions than answers. According to reports, several leads were pursued in the years following her disappearance, none of which produced the kind of definitive development that a case like this genuinely demands, none of which broke through. The frustration that accumulates inside a family during that kind of extended waiting is nearly impossible to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. It isn't grief in any clean, recognizable form. It isn't anger, exactly, or sadness, exactly. It is a layered ache, a specific, relentless kind of pain that comes from suspension, from being unable to move forward and unable to go back. You cannot grieve someone fully without confirmation. You cannot stop grieving because they are still gone. You exist in the in-between, and you learn to carry it without being asked how. And then something shifted. Exactly when the shift began is not entirely clear from what has been reported publicly. Investigations rarely share their internal timelines in real time for reasons that are procedurally sound, even when they are emotionally maddening for the people waiting on answers. But according to sources familiar with the case, a development began to emerge. Something that drew investigators back to information they had looked at before. Something that pointed, for the first time in years, toward a specific place, a possible location connected to Nancy Guthrie. That phrase, a possible location, is not a casual one in the language of an ongoing investigation. It means that physical evidence, or credible intelligence, or some combination of both has directed serious attention to a particular place. It means the abstract has begun to take on a physical form. It means the case has moved. When the FBI becomes involved in a missing persons case, it does not happen without reason. Local investigators have stated, in broad terms, that new information came to light. The specifics of that information have not been publicly disclosed, which is standard practice. When an investigation is active, you do not reveal what you know to the people who may be at the center of what you're building. You don't show the hand before you're prepared to play it. But the family understood what the call meant even without the details. The FBI does not reach out to loved ones of missing persons to provide reassurance. They reach out when something is real enough to require a conversation. When the geography of a case has shifted, when attention has been drawn somewhere new. According to reports, the possible location that surfaced is not in the area where Nancy was last known to be. That detail alone, the suggestion that she may have been, at some point, somewhere investigators had not previously been focused, reframes years of searching. It doesn't just raise the question of where she is. It raises questions about how she got there, about what, or who, bridged the distance between her last known location and this newly surfaced one. Questions have been raised about how this location came to investigators' attention, whether it emerged from new forensic technology, from a witness who had remained silent for years, from a fresh examination of old evidence. None of that has been confirmed. What is clear, implicitly, from the nature of the federal involvement, is that it is being treated as significant, significant enough to move, significant enough to change the shape of a case many feared would never change at all. There's something particular about the moment a family stops expecting a miracle. It doesn't arrive as a single decision. It seeps in over time, through years of fading coverage, through calls from investigators that come less and less often, through the quiet accumulation of unreturned hope. The world moves. They don't. They stay in the place where she was last real to them. And they learn to carry that stillness as if it were weight. Nancy's family has carried it for years. And understanding what that weight actually looks like, what it is made of, day by day, is essential to understanding why this development changes something fundamental for them. They kept her memory alive with a determination that was never passive. Anniversaries marked, her name kept visible on whatever platforms would hold it. Conversations maintained with investigators even when those conversations produced nothing new, because silence felt too much like abandonment, not of her. They never abandoned her, but of the truth she deserved, the truth they refused to stop believing was findable. What rarely gets discussed in coverage of cases like this is the psychological weight that falls specifically on the family. They become, in a very real sense, the living institutional memory of the investigation. They track the inconsistencies. They remember what was said and when, and by whom. They carry the full architecture of the story in a way no external agency, however dedicated, can fully replicate. Because for investigators, even the best ones, this is a case. For her family, it is a person they love. That distinction does not diminish over time. When the FBI call came, the response, according to those close to the situation, was not relief in any simple form. It was something far more complicated. Something that lives between hope and dread in a space that doesn't have a clean name. Because you want answers. You have always wanted answers. But you are also aware, after years of waiting, that the answers may not take the shape you hoped for when this all began. They may bring resolution, but not peace. They may close the question without softening the grief. And yet they answered the phone, as they always have. Because that is what you do. You stay reachable. You stay ready. You never let yourself become unavailable, because the day you step away might be the day the answer finally arrives. That day appears to have come. Cases like this rarely have clean endings waiting at the finish line. That is not cynicism. It is the quiet, honest reality that experienced investigators will tell you when there are no cameras nearby. The longer a case runs without resolution, the more complexity accumulates around it. Witnesses who were afraid years ago develop new reasons to speak, or new reasons to stay silent. Evidence that seemed insignificant at the time becomes critical when seen through the lens of what is now known. Connections between people and places that looked unremarkable once reveal themselves gradually as the threads that hold the whole story together. The possible location that surfaced in Nancy Guthrie's case carries all of those layers. And while no official conclusion has been reached, while investigators are clearly being measured and deliberate in what they share publicly, the shape of what they are working with has begun, at least in outline, to emerge. What does a location mean, exactly? In the context of an investigation like this, it could mean physical evidence found at a specific site. It could mean a credible witness placing her there at a particular time. It could mean a digital or financial trail that terminates at a particular address. Modern investigations weave together the forensic and the technological in ways that were not possible even 15 years ago. Cold cases have been broken open by tools that simply did not exist when the original disappearance occurred. The landscape of what is discoverable has changed. There are also questions that investigators are almost certainly sitting with, questions about who was connected to that location, who had access, whether the place itself is the end of the story or merely a point along a longer, more complex route. No charges have been reported. No public statement has confirmed with precision what was found or what it means. These are not minor distinctions. They matter enormously for the integrity of the investigation, for Nancy's family, and for the truth itself. Nancy Guthrie deserves accuracy. Her family deserves accuracy. And whatever the truth turns out to be, it deserves to be reached carefully, through process, not through the rushing of conclusions. But something is there. Something real enough that the FBI is involved. Something that has caused movement in a case that had been still for far too long. The people who never stopped asking, "Where is she? What happened? Who knows something?" are now closer to an answer than they have ever been. Closure is not the same as arrived, but it is no longer a question of whether anything will ever surface. It is a question of what the surface reveals. There is something this kind of story quietly asks of the people who follow it, not as observers of a mystery, not as people waiting for a resolution they can close a tab on and move away from, but as people who live in communities, in relationships, in systems that are meant to protect us and find us and bring us back when we are lost. Nancy Guthrie was a real person. It is worth saying that plainly and more than once, because in the current of coverage that surrounds cases like hers, the updates, the federal involvement, the surfaced location, it becomes dangerously easy to lose the human being at the center. She had a laugh that people carry with them. She had preferences and habits and small, ordinary plans for the weeks and months ahead. She had people who loved her in the specific, irreducible way that you can only love someone you have truly known, not as a story, not as a case, but as a presence in your actual life. The years her family has spent waiting have not been theoretical. They have been made of real mornings, real seasons, real holidays where her absence sat at the table with them as surely as any living guest. Real moments of hope every time a phone rang or a news alert appeared, followed by the slow, practiced work of pulling themselves back to patience when it turned out to be nothing again. And again, that sustained refusal to give up, that ongoing, daily act of keeping her real and present even as the world moved on around them, is not a small thing. It is not passive waiting. It is an active form of love, carried out in extraordinarily difficult conditions for years, that deserves to be named. What this new development ultimately means, where the investigation leads, what the location confirms, what it opens up or finally closes, remains to be seen. Investigations of this weight move carefully, and they should. The stakes are too high for anything else. The truth is too important to be rushed into a shape that isn't accurate. But the call has been made. The location has been flagged. Federal attention has turned toward a case that many feared had gone permanently dark. And somewhere inside all of it, inside the forensic evidence and the investigative timelines and the carefully worded official statements, there is a woman who deserves to be found, who deserves to have her story known in full, who deserves the kind of resolution her family has spent years refusing to stop believing was possible. Whether that resolution brings peace, or grief, or something that doesn't fit neatly into either, it is, at the very least, an answer. And after years of silence, an answer is everything. The waiting, it seems, may finally be nearing its end. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause and think about the families who hold on quietly, about the cases that never fully leave and never fully resolve, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave your thoughts below. These conversations matter. The people behind these cases matter. And if you want to stay close to stories told this carefully, with this much weight given to the people inside them, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story is already waiting.